Something big just happened in Canada's business world, and it has left politicians, workers, and entire communities asking the same question: what just went wrong? In a stunning development that few saw coming, Amazon has decided to shut down several major warehouse operations in Canada, a move that instantly sent shockwaves across the country. For thousands of employees and local economies that depended on those facilities, the announcement landed like a thunderclap. But the real political drama began moments later, when attention quickly turned toward Ottawa and the growing pressure on Mark Carney. Amazon has been one of the most influential companies shaping modern commerce. Its massive distribution network allows millions of packages to move quickly across cities and provinces every single day. Warehouses and fulfillment centers are the backbone of that system, providing jobs, supporting local transportation networks, and connecting small businesses with customers across the country. That's why the sudden decision to shut down major Canadian warehouses has sparked so much concern. According to early reports, the company informed workers and local officials that several large facilities would be closing as part of what it described as a restructuring of operations. The announcement came without much warning, leaving employees scrambling for answers and communities worried about the economic impact. For many towns and cities, these warehouses weren't just buildings filled with packages. They represented stable employment, economic growth, and a major connection to the digital economy. Within hours of the news breaking, political leaders began reacting. Some local officials demanded immediate explanations from the company, while labor advocates raised alarms about the fate of thousands of workers who suddenly found themselves facing uncertainty. The closures could affect not only warehouse employees but also truck drivers, delivery contractors, and small businesses that rely on Amazon's logistics network to reach customers. But as the story spread across Canadian media, the focus quickly shifted toward the federal government. Critics began asking whether policies coming out of Ottawa may have played a role in pushing large companies to reconsider their operations in Canada. Rising regulatory costs, labor disputes, and ongoing debates about economic policy have already created tension between major corporations and policymakers in recent years. That's where Mark Carney suddenly found himself at the center of the storm. Known for his influence in shaping Canada's economic strategy, Carney has become a key voice in discussions about the country's future economic direction. Supporters see him as someone focused on long-term transformation, pushing Canada toward a modern economy built on sustainability and innovation. But critics argue that such policies could sometimes create uncertainty for businesses operating in the present. As news of the Amazon shutdown spread, opposition figures wasted no time linking the decision to broader concerns about Canada's business climate. Some argued that large corporations may be starting to see Canada as a more complicated place to expand operations. Others suggested that regulatory pressures and labor conflicts could be making companies think twice before investing heavily in new facilities. Carney's office responded quickly, emphasizing that the government remains committed to creating a strong and competitive economy. Officials stressed that Canada continues to attract investment from companies around the world and that economic transitions can sometimes lead to shifts in how businesses operate. However, that explanation did little to calm the growing political tension. Workers who depended on those warehouses began speaking out, sharing stories of how the sudden closures would affect their lives. Many had built careers around the promise of stable employment within Amazon's growing logistics network. Now, they were facing uncertainty about their futures, wondering whether new opportunities would appear or whether they would have to search for work elsewhere. At the same time, economists started examining the potential ripple effects of the closures. Large distribution centers support entire ecosystems of local businesses, from transportation companies to maintenance services. When those facilities disappear, the impact can spread quickly through the surrounding economy. Meanwhile, political commentators began describing the situation as a major test for Ottawa's economic leadership. Could the government reassure investors that Canada remains a strong place to do business? Or would this moment reinforce concerns that companies are becoming more cautious about expanding operations in the country? As the debate intensified, Mark Carney found himself under increasing pressure to respond clearly and decisively. And the way he handled the situation would quickly become one of the most talked about political moments of the week. Because for many Canadians watching this unfold, the question was no longer just about Amazon warehouses. It was about the direction of the country's entire economy. As more details began to emerge about Amazon's decision, the situation became even more complicated. Company representatives explained that the closures were part of a broader operational shift aimed at improving efficiency and restructuring parts of its logistics network. But for many Canadians, that explanation didn't fully answer the biggest question: why were these changes happening here, and why now? Over the past decade, Amazon has expanded rapidly across North America, building massive fulfillment centers designed to deliver products faster than ever before. These facilities rely on advanced technology, complex transportation networks, and large workforces operating around the clock. Canada has been an important part of that expansion, with warehouses strategically placed near major cities to keep delivery times short. However, operating such large facilities also comes with significant costs. Companies must navigate labor regulations, taxes, infrastructure expenses, and shifting market conditions. When those factors begin to change, businesses sometimes reassess whether their current strategy still makes sense. Some analysts believe Amazon's decision may reflect the company's attempt to reorganize how it distributes goods across North America. Advances in automation, shifting consumer behavior, and evolving logistics strategies can all influence where warehouses are located and how they operate. Even so, the timing of the announcement has fueled intense political speculation. Opposition politicians quickly pointed out that Canada has been debating several economic and regulatory changes in recent years. Discussions about labor protections, corporate taxation, and environmental standards have created uncertainty in some industries. Critics argue that when large companies perceive rising costs or complicated regulations, they may decide to reduce their footprint or redirect investment elsewhere. Those arguments placed Mark Carney directly in the spotlight. As a prominent figure shaping economic discussions in Canada, his views on policy and long-term economic strategy carry enormous weight. Carney has often emphasized the importance of building a resilient economy that balances growth with social and environmental responsibility. Supporters say this approach is essential for preparing Canada for the future. The global economy is changing rapidly, with new technologies, climate concerns, and shifting trade patterns transforming how businesses operate. From this perspective, adapting to those changes now could help Canada remain competitive in the decades ahead. But critics argue that the transition toward new economic models must be managed carefully. If companies feel uncertain about the business environment, they may delay investments or move operations to regions where conditions appear more predictable. That concern became a central theme in the political debate following Amazon's announcement. Commentators across television panels and online platforms began asking whether Canada is striking the right balance between regulation and economic growth. Some warned that losing major corporate investments could affect job creation and economic stability. At the same time, labor groups reminded the public that the story is not just about corporate decisions. It's also about workers whose lives are directly impacted by those choices. Thousands of employees who spent years working in Amazon warehouses now face an uncertain path forward. For them, the political debate in Ottawa feels deeply personal. Communities that hosted these facilities are also worried about the economic consequences. Warehouses bring steady employment and support local businesses that depend on increased activity. When a large employer leaves, the effects can ripple through restaurants, transportation services, and small retailers that relied on the additional customers and economic activity. Meanwhile, inside Ottawa, discussions about the issue grew more intense. Government officials began exploring ways to support affected workers while also reassuring investors that Canada remains an attractive destination for business. Economic advisors warned that perception matters just as much as policy when companies decide where to expand operations. Mark Carney's response during this period drew significant attention. Rather than focusing solely on Amazon's decision, he emphasized the broader resilience of Canada's economy. He pointed to growing sectors such as technology, renewable energy, and advanced manufacturing as evidence that the country's economic future remains strong. However, critics argued that such reassurances might not be enough to calm concerns about job losses happening right now. They insisted that Ottawa must demonstrate clearly that Canada can support both innovation and large-scale business investment at the same time. As the debate continued to grow louder, one thing became clear. The Amazon warehouse closures had triggered a much larger national conversation about Canada's economic priorities. And that conversation was only just beginning. By the time the story reached its third day in the headlines, it had transformed from a corporate announcement into one of the biggest political debates in the country. News outlets were analyzing every statement from government officials, economists, and industry leaders. Social media was filled with arguments about what the Amazon shutdown really meant for Canada's economic future. For many observers, the situation highlighted a deeper tension that Canada must eventually resolve. On one side is the push to modernize the economy, focusing on emerging industries, environmental sustainability, and long-term innovation. On the other side is the immediate need to protect existing jobs and ensure that major corporations continue to invest in Canadian communities. Mark Carney has often spoken about the importance of preparing for the future economy, one shaped by technology, climate policies, and changing global markets. From his perspective, economic transformation is not optional. It is necessary if Canada wants to remain competitive in the decades ahead. But critics say transformation must happen without pushing away companies that provide jobs today. They argue that governments should focus on maintaining a stable business environment where large employers feel confident expanding their operations. The Amazon warehouse closures have become a powerful symbol of that debate. For some Canadians, the decision represents the unpredictable nature of modern global corporations, which can shift operations quickly based on efficiency and market strategy. For others, it raises concerns about whether Canada's economic policies are making the country less attractive for large investments. Meanwhile, workers affected by the shutdown are still waiting for answers about what comes next. Local leaders are calling for support programs, retraining opportunities, and economic initiatives to help communities recover from the sudden loss of jobs. Economic experts warn that the long-term impact will depend on how both the government and private sector respond. If new industries and investments quickly replace the lost positions, the disruption could be temporary. But if similar corporate decisions begin to happen more frequently, it could signal deeper challenges for the country's economic strategy. In the political arena, opposition figures continue to pressure Carney to address those concerns directly. They argue that leadership means ensuring that Canada remains a place where businesses want to build, hire, and grow. Supporters of Carney, however, insist that moments like this are part of a larger transition taking place across the global economy. They believe Canada must stay focused on building a future-ready economy, even when individual corporate decisions create short-term disruptions. For now, the story remains far from finished. Amazon's decision has sparked conversations that reach far beyond a few warehouses. It has opened a national debate about investment, economic policy, and the balance between stability today and transformation tomorrow. And as Mark Carney continues to respond to the growing pressure, Canadians are watching closely to see how the situation unfolds. Because what happens next could shape not only the future of these communities, but also the direction of Canada's entire economic strategy for years to come.